Good morning, my people, and welcome to, I hope, a much shorter introduction to 9/11. Because a lot of what we're talking about today is the way in which 9/11 constitutes a historical turning point. Is there something, when we look at something in history and we're not just breaking it into chunks of time, where we start to kind of think about what exactly the meaning was before and after? And on the right here, we see a picture I actually took this summer at the beach, nestled amongst the rental sales and massage and spa places is still the insistence to never forget 9/11. And as we think about the many tragedies and defining moments of the last 20 years, what happened 19 years ago on September 11th is still something we think about. And what is it that do we long to remember the tragedy of 9/11, or do we long to remember the feeling of unity on September 12th? Or do we start to think about the long history on either side? Of course, the World Trade Centers themselves were iconic, mythic symbols even of the U.S. power, erected at the height of kind of the global U.S. dominance in the midst of the Cold War. It was buildings that both expressed power and a commitment to trade, and not surprisingly, they became the symbolic attacks of 9/11. Of course, we would also want to remember that to remember these things is also to remember that there is a history on either side. Not only just that the World Trade Center had been attacked before in 1993, or if we think about international terrorism, certainly Osama bin Laden himself had attacked the United States before at the USS with the USS Cole bombing in 1996. But even when we think about something as complex as this, think about, do we go back to the U.S.'s involvement in backing the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, where Al Qaeda was eventually formed, but also where bin Laden first made its connection with the United States? Do we have to look at something like the first World Trade Center bombing, the original World Trade Center bombing, or the defeat in Iraq of First Desert Storm, and all these things to the moment of 9/11, a day itself, which is so micro-segmented, studied every moment, every minute of the moment is there to be remembered, thought about. 9:05 as the president hears. And each of these moments, all the way till we start to think about the long tail, not just the execution of Saddam Hussein or the fall of Iraq or the London bombings, or bin Laden's death, but Arab Spring or the debates we have over the Ground Zero Mosque. All of these ask us to kind of question again what the long meaning of 9/11 is and what we're not forgetting. Or are we forgetting the fact that terrorism itself was not something new in 2001, but actually the 1990s saw a pronounced spike of terrorism all over the place, not least of which in Oklahoma City, where anti-government activist Timothy McVeigh targeted the Oklahoma City federal building. But it is this idea that there is something that kind of before and after, that the whole world changed and that something changed in 9/11. And it really is the task of historians and students and citizens to consider what that moment is, because that's what it means to understand our history. And whether it is iconic symbols, the terrible tragedies, the photos, an event that was mediated and felt live and experienced on that day, or the way we remember it in graphic novels or in the individual stories of survivors. But on that day, the idea of that the old world seemed to be gone and that there was something new, and that the equations of life no longer seemed to work, that idea of balance, of globalization now smashed by airplanes, 3 airplanes. The moment where we look at George Bush as he's hearing about this in the midst of a moment of education, he's reading to students and he hears about something that's going to define his presidency. And as we think about the meaning of that loss, how we understand that, what are the symbols of our grief, and how we kind of take that emotion and we turn it into something about that changes our world. It can be something as minor as how we fly and the security and the pronounced differences we feel there, or it could just be in the absence, the things that are not there, that we do not see. Because memory is always about the present, as David Blight says. And whether it's remembering the Pentagon Memorial, the other attack, the center of American military might, or the failed attempt in the people who themselves, average Americans, sacrifice themselves, now turned into a beautiful grove of trees in a field in Pennsylvania. But the walls remain, the materials remain, and it remains for humans themselves to tell you what is being erased and what is going to be remembered. Because history does change. When does it change? How does it change? And it can be as massive as privacy and your individual rights, and it can be also more subtle as the way we look at the world and shape the world. And this quote we can weave up, and I encourage, perhaps in our discussion, we can maybe take it apart, but this idea that what 9/11 brought is an end to kind of the dream of globalization, the happy 90s, and instead what we are getting here is that we are getting the beginning of walls, a time of kind of pronounced tribalism, of apartheid, and a sense of more divisions as we start to kind of try to administer the blurred boundaries between war and peace. And terrorism does unsettle that basic boundary between times of war and times of peace. And I hope you look at it and consider it, especially as we consider what does it mean to be a citizen and essential rights and functions of governments. Thanks for listening.